If you've been tuning in over the years, you're likely well aware of my consistent stance on the ongoing criminalization of cannabis. Some have even labeled this show as actively opposing the state's approach to taxing and regulating cannabis. I've faced criticism and questions like, why aren't you satisfied with the ability to purchase cannabis at the limited number of state approved dispensaries, even if it comes at a steep price? Well, therein lies the crux of this issue. Many people will say that the Illinois Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act of 2019, often abbreviated as the CRTA, legalized cannabis in Illinois. If you're watching the video version of this podcast, I'm saying that with air quotes because of the fact that the narrow scope of the CRTA left most of the existing criminal penalties, which were originally established in the Cannabis Control Act of 1978, entirely untouched. Today, these laws continue to be wielded against individuals for possessing and cultivating cannabis. Realize this: the continued criminalization of cannabis continues in Illinois as a direct result of the shortcomings of the CRTA. I know of at least one figure in the media that has tried to twist these words incorrectly. This is not only irresponsible and dangerous, it is false. It's crucial to recognize that the ongoing criminalization persists in Illinois precisely due to the inadequacies of the CRTA. Because the scope of this measure was so limited, if you find yourself just slightly outside of the scope, you will find yourself in massive legal peril. On top of that, to quote defense attorney Evan Bruno, quote, a minor violation of the new law carries a harsher penalty than a minor violation of the old law, end quote. You can read more from defense attorney Evan Bruno. I'm linking their article, which I just referenced, from the Illinois State Bar Association. It is entitled, quote, the unfinished work of cannabis reform in Illinois, end quote. I'm going to be a little bit more blunt here. People that perpetuate anything but this truth should be ashamed of themselves. If you're standing up for the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act as it stands today, you are part of the problem. The Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act of 2019 is not a piece of meaningful reform because it fails to recognize cannabis use, cultivation, and possession need not be a criminal issue entirely. Anything less than a complete end to these policies is not good enough. This is the Cole Memo. I'm your host, Cole Preston. Every episode is released in audio, video, and transcript formats. To find the transcript, audio, or video version of any episode, please refer to the description of the episode that you're listening to now. Within that description, you can find a link that will take you to our website, which will display the transcript for this episode and the platforms where you can find this episode in audio or video formats. If you're unable to locate the episode description on whichever platform you're listening from, simply note the episode number and visit thecolememo.com. From there, you can use our new search functionality, which is located in the top right-hand corner, to find the corresponding episode, and then you'll be able to access the audio, video, and transcript version of that episode. Let's just say you're looking for episode 60. Type into that search bar 60, and it'll pull it right up. From there, you'll be able to find any links that we reference during the episode. I do have some in this episode that I'll be referencing, so definitely check out the show notes so that you might be able to do your own research. If you're not listening to this episode of the Cole Memo on Patreon, then you're listening to this episode later than our patrons. To become a patron, go to thecolememo.com/Patreon. It's a great way to support our show, and as I said, it gives you immediate access to our episodes as they release. Another great way to support our show is by going to thecolememo.com/support. You can make a one-time, monthly, or yearly contribution of your choice. That's right. You could donate $1 once, or you could donate $1 monthly. That'd be $12 a year. Or you could donate $1 a year, whatever you choose. Every little bit helps. If you're not able to support us financially, that is okay. One of the best ways to support our show is free. Subscribe to or follow our show. Leave us a positive review from wherever you're listening to us from. Favorite this episode, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, or post a review. Your engagement and support is appreciated. Today is February 23rd, 2024, and I'm so thrilled to introduce our guest, Representative Carol Ammons, who shares my outspoken criticism of the CRTA. Representative Ammons passionately testified against the act. She shed light on its deficiencies well before its implementation. For those who haven't had the opportunity to witness that speech, stay tuned. Following our discussion, I plan to re-air her compelling speech. Enjoy the episode. Representative Ammons, I just want to thank you so much for sitting down with me today. As I told you before we went on air, you truly are one of my heroes in the context of cannabis, and our discussion will reveal why that is. Before we get into that, can you just introduce yourself to my audience? Tell us who you are.
Thank you for having me on the Cold Memo. I really love the title of your show. It's really cool.
Thank you.
I am Carol Ammons. I am the representative of the 103rd Legislative District in Illinois. I have been in office for 10 years. This is literally my 10th year. We're closing out with this session is my 10th year in service. I am up for another 2 years in the next term. I don't currently have an opponent. And so I'm looking forward to some of the restorative justice work that we can do in the Illinois General Assembly. And I'm doing some work that probably is outside, if you will, some of the standard work that people are customary to getting out of legislative bodies. So we can talk about some of that if that's of interest to you. But I'm happy to be here on the Cold Memo.
Yeah. Thank you, Representative Ammons. And like I said, I think this will springboard us right into our conversation. I think you'll really like the words that I use in this question. It's been 4 years since Illinois enacted legislation to decriminalize small amounts of cannabis and establish a framework for its taxation and regulation. Many people call this legalization, but I don't, because I don't think it's legal if you can still get arrested for it. Now that some time has passed, it's been 4 years. What are your thoughts on the impacts of this measure?
Yeah, I also agree with you that I argued I don't know if you know this, but I introduced alongside some of the other legislative initiatives, House Bill 902, way back when we began talking about this, because I believed in a couple of things that should have been inherent in them. Once you say that this is legal, and I've learned this from some really great friends out of Connecticut who are way ahead of Illinois on these questions, right? But once you say something is legal, like alcohol is legal, yes, you can be arrested if you are driving under the influence, but for no other reason can you be arrested for alcohol, right? And I saw cannabis in the same way. Now, I don't have a long personal history with cannabis myself. I never smoked. I didn't smoke or drink at all. And so that's not something that I have personal experience, but what I witnessed was the criminality that was using cannabis to identify certain communities and to use the justice system against them because of cannabis. And so I thought that when we passed legislative measures, we would legalize completely, which we have not done. And we've seen people continuously be charged with having too many plants in their basement. We had a case in Rantoul, Illinois, just north of Champaign-Urbana. A woman was caught growing more than the allowable amount without a license from the medical industry. All of this is capitalism at its best. That's what it is. Because the reality is, if you say this thing is legal, if I can grow 6 broccoli plants and nobody come and arrest me for it, why can't I grow 6 marijuana plants in my backyard? Why would I be arrested for that? Except that the cannabis industry that is driven by capitalists, right, are able to make it illegal for me to do what I'm doing so that they can corner the market. That's all it is. And we've seen this over and over and over again in so many ways that I have been a staunch in staunch opposition to any cannabis legislative initiative that does not go back and fix the original problems.
And that is why you're my hero.
Thank you.
So I just want to peel the page back. As you said, on January 25th, which was well before the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, was January 25th of 2019, was when
Right.
you,
The medical. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and it's when you actually introduced your measure to legalize cannabis, which I argue would have actually done that. Residents would have been able to grow up to 24 plants. I didn't get the impression that you would have license limitations or really continued criminalization of cannabis. But even at the time, the Tribune even said the measure is unlikely to pass because lawmakers are expected to act on a more restrictive proposal that's been in the works for more than a year.
That is correct.
I'm just curious, why do you think your bill didn't get widespread support given the fact that it is a better bill? It's more progressive. It actually
Yeah.
addresses the root problem.
I mean, the industry didn't write it. That's why. I mean, those who have been working on the cannabis, and we had many public hearings around the state that sold the the initial bill as if that bill was going to bring equity and justice. They called it a reparations measure, which I completely oppose that concept. They said that it was going to bring multiple millionaires into the Black community. It did not. It was going to bring opportunities and jobs to Black people in this great new industry, which it did not. And even currently, there is no measure to track the equitable hiring practices in the industry. So I'll go around the country, and if I'm traveling, I'll stop into cannabis facilities all around. I visited one in Missouri that's owned by a Black woman. And she said to me, and literally she gave me the insight. I said, I don't understand why this is happening, why you're struggling to make money when I'm watching all of these other industry folk, and they have 2 or 3 facilities they've opened since we've legalized in Illinois. And she said the cost of the application, the square footage that was required in order for you to have a medical or medicinal facility, it was designed to exclude certain communities because everyone knows income inequality is a real thing. And so if you want to start a business and you don't have capital to invest in your own business and the banks don't loan it to you, right? Black folks don't get bank loans at the same rate of their white counterparts. Then how am I going to open up a 50,000 square foot medicinal facility to put me at the front of the line when recreational licenses come into effect? They knew that from the very beginning, that this was going to exclude certain communities. And I attempted to highlight that all the way to the final vote that took place on the first bill. I tried to highlight it up into the final vote was taken, telling people not to vote for it because it is not going to create what the hyperbole is being designed around it, the propaganda. And they refused to hear. And now here we are in 2024 trying to still correct what we knew and was warned about, from the low interest loan fiasco that they did, to the licenses of equity holders, to the transporter's license that was designed specifically to make sure that even if you got a transporter's license, the industry can transport their own stuff from their farm to the dispensary. So how are you going to get business? All of this was really kind of common sense. But if you go back in history, I did do this. When they proposed this, I looked at the Gold Rush and the Homestead Act. And I went back to those pieces of legislation because they created the greatest transfer of wealth to white hands that existed in the 1800s. And when you look at the Homestead Act, they wrote eligibility in a similar fashion. You needed $16 ultimately to benefit from the Homestead Act in 1864. So how many Black people in 1864 who are enslaved until 1865, 1866 are going to benefit from the Homestead Act? So we did the exact same thing in policy in the 1800s that we did with cannabis in the 2000s.
Yeah, and I got to give you credit. I will play it again. Honestly, it makes me cry to watch it. I watched it again this morning, your speech that you gave after the vote was passed and after you weren't able to speak on the bill.
Right.
And I loved you said, I call on my colleagues to look at this issue as a justice issue and not a revenue one.
Yeah. This is the moment where we saw the gold rush of our era, right? The war on drugs has devastated Black communities across this nation and put us into what we considered a permanent underclass position. And so here we come with this industry that Black people have been in, whether we like it or not, illegally for generations, because there's no economy in the Black community. And so the only economy that comes to the Black community are these kind of exploitative things like crack cocaine and cannabis. This is what we have to sell as a commercial product because you're locked out of all other industries, right? And so when you look at the transfer of wealth in the drug industry, it is not in the hands of Black people. We're still being arrested for it, but it's not in the hands of Black people who were overwhelmingly sent to the penitentiaries across this nation as a result of possession of the very thing that you're selling by the tons today in the hands of the white majority.
Right. And if I could distill it's as if we issued a limited number of golden tickets and we're saying, hey, this is going to repair the harms that have been caused on the war on drugs. And I think you and I are both arguing that maybe to repair the harms of the war on drugs, we end the war on drugs.
How about that? How about just ending it, right? The process has been so convoluted. I remember the day that the medicinal holders received their unabated access to the recreational market. I remember the day in Illinois where they were running around visiting dispensaries and clapping their hands about how great it is Illinois is going to lead on equity. I mean, these are the things that you can look up into any newspaper of the time, and you'll see how we lauded this great thing that Illinois has done to bring equity and justice. And you know what? I don't call a piece of the taxes for nonprofit organizations equity and justice. I do not call that equity and justice. So because you took some of the tax money and you created what we call in Illinois the R3 program, and if you look deeply, Cole, and I encourage you to do it, to look deeply into the dispersion of the dollars, the distribution of those dollars that come out of the R3 program, look very deeply into the organizations who receive the majority of those dollars. You will also see a very similar pattern that the nonprofit industry comes in, big industries that are supposed to serve the Black community, receives the lion's share of even those dollars. And guess what? The Black community still looks the same today as it did in 2021. And it hasn't changed the number of Black people being arrested and stopped for the war on drugs at all.
Yeah, and the sinister thing about this, the R3 money and taxes that my friend always points out that I never really thought about is it's really ironic when you consider those taxes are coming from cannabis users. So not only are the people, right?
Right.
We're
It's coming from the
shouldering
people who
them
go to the dispensaries, right?
bingo. But to your
That's exactly
point,
right.
to your point, as evidenced by research by James Swartz, PhD at the James Adams College of Social Work at the University of Illinois in Chicago, arrests persist. They continue, predominantly in areas without cannabis dispensaries. Coincidentally, these areas have always historically shouldered the brunt of these enduring policies.
I mean, you can go to Chicago and see this happening constantly, but not where the dispensaries are. I'm at the University of Illinois Community Urbana-Champaign. When I first came here, I was doing some organizing work, and I'm an activist. That's just what I am. And so we were doing some traffic stop data in Urbana-Champaign. Urbana-Champaign is notorious for stopping Black drivers. And it doesn't matter if you are actually from this community or passing through this community, you have a higher propensity than white drivers to be stopped in Urbana-Champaign. So I said, God, why would that be? You know, if you're looking for drugs. Now, report comes out a few years later that there's more, obviously, we got a Urbana-Champaign campus. There's more drug users on the campus than there are in the general community. So why is the general community the ones with the burden in the traffic court
Right.
higher than that of the campus where all the young people are? And you know darn well every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, right? We just
Mhm.
had someone literally have an alcohol overdose and died in the cold,
Underage too.
underage on the campus of the U of I. No,
Mhm.
so now why is it that the numbers in the traffic court, the visual view of traffic court is predominantly African American drivers, when the majority community is predominantly white, and you know darn well majority of that is on the campus of the University of Illinois?
Yeah.
But their numbers do not compare in traffic stops where you are looking for drugs, right? Those are pretextual stops, looking for paraphernalia, drugs, traffic tickets that you may not have a driver's license. These kind of things are targeted, and we know they're targeted, but we still continue to pretend as if they are not targeting these communities.
So I've got an interesting thought for you to that point. Erin Johnson, our cannabis regulation oversight officer, I recently joined a discussion with her, and she recounted hearing discussions at a conference about cannabis operators in Michigan facing receivership, aka going out of business, and enduring significant price compression, aka prices are falling due to their regulatory framework. Erin mentioned that her office works every day to ensure that these types of things do not occur in Illinois. She made it clear that she felt Illinois' limited license approach is the key factor preventing such challenges from arising in the state. So it sounds like two metrics of success they have is keeping people from going out of business, which, by the way, I just reported last night, one of the first social equity infusers went out of business. Also
Which one
keeping,
was that?
uh,
Do
I
you
can't remember
remember?
the name, but
If you
something
come up with
baked.
it, I'd like to know, because I know there's only a handful of them
Yes.
currently.
But the other thing they want to prevent is price compression. I'm curious what you think about this idea, Representative Ammons. If those are part of their metrics for success, maybe stopping arrests should also be part of a metric for success in legalization.
I don't think that that was the focal point, even though part of the cannabis legislation was to clear the records of thousands of people who had cannabis arrests on their records. That part of it still hasn't been finished,
Right.
right? But and it can't ever be finished because you're still arresting people for cannabis, right?
Right.
So does right. So if on one hand you say the equity part is I'm going to clear the records of thousands of people who have cannabis on their records, but you're still arresting people and putting cannabis on their records.
Yeah. I mean, I just had one person that, to your point, they got arrested for possession of cannabis, even though they had a medical card, and their lawyer told them to
Really?
plead guilty, and that the law was so flexible that just plead guilty, we'll go through the process, and then we'll expunge your record. So it's like, okay, so we have to send people through the system just to get them expunged. It's crazy.
It's a really crazy process, which I thought in my bill, if you recall, we had automatic expungement,
Yes.
meaning you don't have to do anything.
Hmm.
And we're not going to arrest anybody for it. I believe that we should allow people to grow as many plants as they can manage. It's not easy growing plants, as
No.
we know. This is not an easy thing to do. But if you so choose to grow plants, you should be able to grow as many as you are capable of growing. Why would we limit that? Why are you forcing everyone to these high price dispensaries so that we can pay this high price tax so that we can generate revenue to give back to the same companies that we're already giving grants to in the state of Illinois for other things, right? So there's no real effort to stop charging people, period, and arresting them, to allow people to have the freedom of expression when it comes to a plant. This is a plant, and they should have freedom of expression. If they want to grow it, they should be able to do that. And this concept of keeping the licenses constricted, that's the part that reminds me of an earlier period of time. the gold rush, right? The Homestead Act, right? These constrictions that the government is going to control who can get in and who cannot get in. That's part and parcel to the reason why you have already seen social equity people going out of business. And I will tell you this, that there's a gentleman who I know in the South suburban area of Chicago. I think he's in Chicago Heights. So I go out, he invite me to come and see this big strip mall. The strip mall has been closed for decades in this community. It's a low income community. So he purchases the strip mall so that he can open up these three vestiges of a cannabis related businesses, right? Infusing and growing and whatever. So he does that. I go and visit his facility. This is 2 years ago, let me tell you that. I recently go and visit a Black farmer in this nearby area. I go past this facility and this facility is still closed. It is not open. He has not been able to realize the benefits that the white large companies got when they could put $5,000 in for 10 applications and get 15 licenses out of the deal. I'm exaggerating, of course, you know that. But the reality is those social equity people had to stand up on the same platform that the advantaged medicinal people had, and no competition was in their arena. You see that? So
Right.
if you think restricting the licenses, Department of Ag, is the way for you to bring justice and social justice into the space, I totally disagree. That's not going to bring it. And what I argued for, actually, the medicinal people had a 2-year head start, right? When we came along with this new license for recreational, what I argued for at that time was that since they already cornered the medicinal space, we're going to give these recreational social equity people a year advantage to build their businesses. We're going to give them the low interest. See, this is where I'm going with it. So I'm saying give them the advantage that you gave to these
Right.
medicinal people for 2 years. We didn't do that. So if you think that you're going to ever stand up, you're going to be fighting this when I'm not a legislator. They're going to still be fighting to get into this cannabis industry in all kind of backdoor ways. And we're going to be passing legislation from here to eternity, because what they have done is lock people completely out by policy.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you say, that has happened in other states. What you're referring to is sometimes called first mover advantage. And they tried to prevent that from happening in New York. And just like
Mm,
what you just described, that happened in New York.
yeah.
So
And I did share this with my colleagues in New York before they even got to that point. We had already seen the flaws of our system, even though we held it. You ask the people who pass it, they think is, well, we just got to keep tweaking it. I don't believe in that. I believe that the floor has been set. And once you set the floor of who can and who cannot participate, it is very difficult for people to come in unless you Snoop Dogg, right? Out
right.
in California, or who are some of the other big rappers who said, oh, I got enough money to get in this, right?
Yeah.
Jay-Z and them. That's what you did. You set it for the capitalist class at the top, and you're going to have us try to get in community at the bottom at the same rate that the billionaires are getting in at the top. I mean,
Yeah.
I never thought that was a good strategy.
Yeah. So I want to be mindful of our time. Why do you think people like you, and I actually have seen another, I don't know if you know this representative or if you're close to them, but Representative Flowers is another one that has submitted similar legislation that I call meaningful reform.
Yeah.
It's actually meaningful. Uh, why do you think you're alone in supporting meaningful reform?
Oh, Cole. Let's see. Why am I alone? And me and Mary Flowers are two of the only ones who voted against it. Some of my colleagues regret it to this day and have shared with me personally that they regret voting for the original bill. Um, we're alone because just like any other commodity in a capitalist system, unless you deal with campaign finance, you're going to be alone. I mean, I know intimately how this game is played, and whoever pays plays. I totally understand how this works. So you'll look and say, oh, these people don't really support her campaign. No, because I don't ask them to. There is a real fundamental problem in every state in this union, and it is called campaign finance. And unless we deal with campaign finance, people believe that they elected me and sent me to represent their interests from my community, right? But in many, many cases, the people who are in Springfield are lobbyists, and they represent the interests of the cannabis industry. I recall talking to the first executive director, and I'm not going to name her. I called her one day, and she was the first executive director of the Cannabis Association. And that Cannabis Association is 100% white, okay? This is the first one. That association, I call her, she's a former member of the Senate. And I say to her, listen, I need your association to take a position on the social equity port. This is problematic, right? You're not going to get the diversity in the industry without the big guys saying, yes, we're going to make space. They would not take that position. And every single bill that has come out since that time, from my colleague Ford, I love him to death, his bill was supposed to do what? They said, I'm going to read it to you because it was so profound to me. It says this bill 1443, if you remember House Bill 1443, it granted 110 new cannabis licenses that's going to be awarded through 2 lotteries, which I oppose lottery, targeted toward Black, Hispanic, and other minority residents of disproportionately impacted areas. As part of the qualifying criteria, one of the lotteries would prioritize those previously arrested and convicted of previous cannabis offenses. Cole, have you seen 110 new social equity people pop up in Illinois anywhere? I
No.
have not either. Have you seen a real push where he says in this legislation, it is going to prioritize those previously arrested and convicted of previous cannabis related offenses? Have you seen that in mass in your reporting that Illinois has cleared all of these people's records, has prioritized them, and guess what? We're still creating new ones that we need to prioritize. I haven't seen it. So I am not of the opinion that any of these bills, as long as the foundation has been set to literally protect this industry that is controlled by 99% white males, as long as that is the case, none of these other priorities become a real priority. That's just the bottom line. If we had started with social equity owners from the beginning of recreational, this landscape would look very different, but we did not. And as long as we did not, we will still continue to pass laws, and you'll see new ones prop up this session that's supposed to clean up the state's cannabis legalization law by expanding diversity on the state's Restore, Reinvest, and Renew oversight board. See, all of these things are connected. And as long as there's an opportunity for the majority to receive the lion's share of the capital, that is how it will work.
Well, Representative Ammons, I've really enjoyed my time with you today, and I've got one last question before we close, and I'm just curious what you think about this. This is my real worry with all this, and I'm sure you share the same concern. I'm going to share a comic because this helps for a lot of
Okay.
people to visualize things. This comic is by Box Brown. He does a weekly cannabis comic, and it's great. And he says, one of my concerns is for losing momentum for legalization. The Netherlands has a small, hobbled together cannabis market riddled with major problems, and it points to a person on a bike that says illegally transporting weed from illegal grow to legal shop. But they've lost the political will to fix it. The average person sees the cannabis issue as over. With an estimate of 350,000 weed arrests in the United States and the precipice and being at the precipice of a national corporate oligopoly, we cannot lose the energy to legalize. What do you think? I know that's a big question to end on, but what do you think the
Yeah.
answer is to the apathy?
I have encouraged those who are in the social equity space, the smaller Black vendors and Latino vendors that I meet with, on a regular basis when they reach out to us. I have encouraged them to not lose the point here. of legalization, right? It was supposed to provide an open door, a fair access point to entrepreneurs and business people to become legal. So to get rid of the illegal market and bring an opportunity to people to be legal on the state level, national level, and whatever. That has not happened. And what I have seen, and similar to the comic strip, is that some of these folks in these smaller groups who are trying to push for a more equitable legislative measure, I think they have lost their momentum. I feel that they have lost their momentum because every bill that has come out, as long as that bill does not allow them unfettered access to a market that you've given unfettered access to white majorities, unless you create that parity, you're going to always be fighting to get into an industry where you are unfortunately outmanned and outgunned because you don't have the lawyers and you don't have the revenue to challenge these big industry giants that have taken over the market. That's my concern as well. I don't see the push from the grassroots that was there to provide this opening. The grassroots did this, but the corporates came in and took it, and the policymakers allowed it. So the grassroots found it, and for generations have been saying cannabis should not be illegal since the 1920s. So the grassroots built it, and then the capitalists, oligarchs came and took it with their paid for elected officials. That's how this works. And I am concerned that what we see going forward, which is why I have not voted yes on the cannabis bill, what we have seen going forward is that they have allowed continuously for them to maintain what they have without having to open it up to the rest of us.
It's a shame. Well, Representative Ammons, before we go, did you have a good time today?
I had a wonderful time. Thank you so much for your patience with us trying to get this organized. But I hope that we can touch bases again by the end of session. I'm sure there will be many things that are being asked for in the cannabis space that we'll have much more to talk about.
Yes, I would love that. I would absolutely love that. Well,
We'll
folks,
make it happen.
I hope you found as much value in this conversation as I did. We'll see you on the next episode of the Cole Memo. Take care.
Peace.
The Illinois General Assembly voted to send the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act to Governor J.B. Pritzker's desk on May 31st, 2019. Directly after the vote, Representative Carol Ammons gave a speech where she explained why she could not vote for this bill.
For words, do you seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Please proceed, Representative.
It is with great disappointment that I stand in this chamber being denied the right to speak to the devastation that has impacted our community for generations. I grew up in the city of Joliet, where Stateville Prison is located, and have watched generations of Black men be locked up for the possession of drugs in this country. I listened to my colleague Tepeti lay out very clearly the intentional destruction of Black communities across this country, but specifically in the state of Illinois. And I stand here today having been denied the right to speak on the most important legislation that will impact our communities in my lifetime. And I am offended by that denial. Our community has suffered untold harm and many devastations that we cannot just wipe over because we need revenue in the state of Illinois. I agree with my colleagues on the right and the left that this legislation will have unintended consequences. Will those consequences remedy the 40 to 50 years of drug devastation that has destroyed the communities of East St. Louis, Danville, Joliet, the south and west sides of Chicago. For generations, we have had to wait for our emancipation. For generations, we've been denied access to jobs and education and training and opportunity. For generations, our children have looked at us as if we have not done our due diligence. And today, the very denial of my right to stand before this body and express the harm and devastation that we've experienced, this law will not legalize drugs for our communities. This legislation will still see devastation on the behalf of those who are stopped by the police as a result. We are calling for an international declaration for the renewal of people of African descent in this state from this day forward. We deserve justice and access to justice in every single way. We are calling on this governor to make sure that he not only enforces equality and justice as it pertains to this legislation, but everything that goes forward. It is not good enough that we simply expunge records for those of low-level marijuana possession. That is not good enough. That young black men and women have to walk around and be saddled with the results of this legislation going forward. We know that the people who are going to benefit from this are already benefiting. They're already benefiting economically. We know that black communities from the top to the bottom of this state are struggling economically, and this does nothing to solve that problem. And so I call on my colleagues to look at this issue as a justice issue and not a revenue one. We understand that the state is strapped for cash, but it is certainly not because black communities have stolen those dollars. We have been denied equal justice under the law, and we have been stopped at 3 to 4 times higher rates than any other community. And we call on justice today for our communities, and this measure must be looked at as simply a beginning and not an end. We will not stop fighting for our communities from this day forward. And we call on the Democratic Party of Illinois to stand with us to bring justice and equality to our communities in every single area of life. I refuse to vote on a bill that would not allow me to speak to it. And I hope that people of Illinois will do better for the communities who are suffering. Do not make them victims. Do not make them victims of our legislation. I want to acknowledge the profound need for justice for us, the untold suffering and evils that our people have suffered in this country, from slavery to emancipation to post-Jim Crow era to drug laws and to the drug war. We have suffered, and we demand better from this institution. I hope that we are not doing the wrong thing by our community. I thank my colleague, Representative Petty, for putting on record the true reality of how we've gotten to this point. And I thank him for being a voice for us. I thank all of my new members who stood on this issue. I do appreciate all the work that has been done to get us to this point, but I don't believe we've done all that we can do to bring about justice and equity. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to speak today. And thank you so much for all that you do. Thank you.